At a large technology company, a single week can now look like this. At 9 o'clock on Monday morning, management announces 10,000 job cuts. The memo says the organization must become leaner, faster, and ready for the age of artificial intelligence. By Friday afternoon, its careers page is advertising thousands of openings for machine learning engineers, data center specialists, enterprise sales teams, and senior managers. The company has not forgotten what it did on Monday. It is doing both on purpose. Big tech has spent the last few years cutting jobs at industrial scale while continuing to hire heavily, and in several cases, rebuilding much of its net headcount. Jobs disappear under banners like efficiency, restructuring, and the current favorite AI transformation. Then the org chart begins filling back up. Alphabet, Amazon, Microsoft, and Meta can announce dramatic cuts, dominate a week of headlines, and still end up with workforces surprisingly close to where they began. The exits are public. The replacement work is scattered across job listings, contractor agreements, acquisitions, and quarterly filings, even though contractors do not count toward reported employee headcount. Layoffs get a breaking news banner. Hiring gets a spreadsheet. That does not mean the layoffs were fake, and it certainly does not mean every engineer was escorted out on Tuesday and invited back on Thursday with a fruit basket and a slightly worse password. Real people lost real jobs. There is no evidence that the recovery in aggregate headcount represents the exact same people being rehired. Companies can remove one set of roles, locations, seniority levels, and compensation packages while recruiting another. A mature product team disappears. An AI infrastructure team appears. A veteran employee may leave with unvested awards forfeited, while the company redirects part of the budget to contractors, lower-cost overseas teams, or scarce specialists. Corporate strategy has discovered reincarnation, the job returns, but the employee does not. Meta is a useful example. At the end of 2022, the company reported 86,482 employees. After the most aggressive phase of its so-called year of efficiency, that number fell to 67,317 at the end of 2023. Then it began climbing again, 74,067 in 2024 and 78,865. In 2025, Meta remained smaller than at year-end 2022. But by year-end 2025, it had rebuilt roughly 60% of the intervening net headcount decline. The badge count came back much faster than the employment bargain underneath it. The returning positions were not necessarily in the same departments, countries, or pay bands, and they were definitely not proof that the same people had been welcomed home. This is why the usual debate is AI replacing workers or not misses the more interesting story. The real action is happening in the financial plumbing. Payroll is competing with data center construction. Stock grants are competing with buybacks. Severance charges are being exchanged for future margin targets. Every delayed hire, offshore contract, canceled stock award, and newly created AI role changes who carries the risk when management's forecast turns out to have been written in PowerPoint rather than carved into stone. Viewed this way, repeated layoffs are not simply an attempt to make big tech smaller. They can function as a way to reprice the workforce, redirect spending, and preserve the company's option to rebuild different teams later. Total headcount can recover without restoring the wages, job security, career ladders, and bargaining power that were lost. The number of employees may look familiar. The company they work for can be completely different. So the useful question is not whether big tech hired everyone back. It did not. The useful question is what the layoffs bought, why companies keep using them, and why artificial intelligence makes the strategy easier to sell. To see the trick clearly, separate three numbers that are usually blended together: announced layoffs, gross hiring, and net headcount. Announced layoff totals count positions companies say they plan to eliminate. They do not necessarily equal completed layoffs or unique people displaced. Gross hiring counts employee starts. Net headcount is the point. In-time workforce change after hiring, layoffs, ordinary attrition, acquisitions, and other changes. A company can announce 20,000 position cuts, hire 18,000 people, lose another 5,000 through ordinary turnover, acquire a business with 7,000 employees, and finish the year exactly where it started. The final number tells you the size of the workforce. It tells you almost nothing about who survived the journey. That distinction matters because headlines often treat the labor force like water in a bathtub. Pull the plug, the level falls, turn on the tap, it rises. But employees are not identical units of water. A quality engineer who has spent 15 years learning why a production line misbehaves cannot be replaced for one by a newly hired data scientist. A junior developer in California is not financially equivalent to a contractor in another country. A recruiting team, a trust and safety group, an advertising salesperson, and an AI researcher may each count as one employee, but they occupy very different places on the income statement and inside the company. The first layoff wave was not mysterious. During the pandemic, digital demand surged, interest rates hovered near zero, and technology companies hired as if every temporary habit would become permanent. Video calls, cloud services, e-commerce, online advertising, and home entertainment all looked like roads with no speed limit. Executives built capacity for several years of growth in advance. Investors rewarded them for it. When demand normalized and interest rates rose, the same expansion suddenly looked less visionary and more like a very expensive group project. Nobody remembered approving. Cutting some of that excess was rational. No company is required to preserve every job forever, and a business that never closes a failed project eventually becomes a museum with payroll. But the correction evolved into something broader. Layoffs can improve near-term margin guidance and have sometimes been followed by positive market reactions, creating an incentive for management to use them repeatedly. A layoff announcement did not merely remove costs, it signaled discipline. It told Wall Street that management had discovered the word efficiency, usually several quarters after employees had discovered there was not enough work to do. Artificial intelligence arrived at exactly the right moment. It did not cause the original post-pandemic correction, but it gave companies a new destination for capital and could provide a more attractive narrative for cuts elsewhere. Large technology companies were collectively spending or planning to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on chips, data centers, power contracts, networking equipment, and frontier models. That money had to come from somewhere. At the same time, saying that a division was being eliminated because management had overestimated demand sounded like an error. Saying it was being reshaped for an AI future sounded like strategy. One version asks why the forecast was wrong. The other gets a keynote presentation. This does not mean AI is irrelevant. It is already automating pieces of coding, customer support, document processing, advertising, design, and analysis. But replacing tasks is not the same as replacing the person responsible for the final result. A coding assistant can generate a function in seconds. It does not automatically understand the architecture around it, the security consequences, the customer promise, or the strange legacy system that runs perfectly as long as nobody looks directly at it. Productivity tools can reduce the number of people needed for some workflows. They can also increase the amount of work a company attempts, creating demand for different people rather than eliminating demand altogether. For major technology companies, a more defensible description is not mass replacement, but workforce reallocation and repricing. Many are reducing recruiting teams, support functions, junior positions, middle management, and mature product groups while bidding aggressively for machine learning researchers, infrastructure engineers, chip specialists, and people who can secure enough electricity to run the whole experiment. One ordinary salary disappears. Another role returns with a new title, a different location, and a list of requirements long enough to qualify as historical fiction. This is why net headcount can be deceptive. Alphabet ended 2025 with roughly 190,800 employees, around its previous peak, even after years of highly publicized cuts. That does not prove the layoffs failed, because the workforce may now be allocated very differently. Amazon's total employment also sits close to its 2021 high, but that figure combines corporate technology roles with an enormous logistics network. Microsoft reported stable year-end headcount before some of its latest reductions had fully landed. The numbers are useful, but only if we resist making them say more than they can. A restored total is consistent with renewed demand for labor at the company, but it is not proof that the old jobs returned, or that all of the increase came from organic hiring. From management's perspective, the immediate attraction is straightforward. Payroll is one of the largest controllable operating expenses. A restructuring charge hurts today, while promised savings improve the story for tomorrow. Cutting an established division can lower the wage bill, reduce layers of management, and create budget for a smaller number of highly paid specialists. The company may still employ the same number of people 2 years later, but with a different average salary, a different stock compensation profile, and much more flexibility over where the work is performed. There is also a market signal. Investors cannot observe the quality of every internal project, but they can observe headcount, expenses, margins, and guidance. When a chief executive announces 10,000 cuts, the action is visible and immediate. The damage from lost experience may take a year to appear, if it ever appears clearly at all. This creates an awkward incentive. The savings are measured in the next quarter, while the cost of forgetting how the company works is distributed across delayed launches, technical debt, quality problems, missed sales, and employees quietly updating their resumes. Workplace researchers sometimes call part of this turnover contagion. Once a layoff begins, employees who survive do not necessarily feel lucky. They learn that performance, loyalty, and years of institutional knowledge may not protect them from a budget decision made 3 reporting levels away. Employees with the strongest outside options may be more likely to leave voluntarily. A company that intends to remove roles it considers less essential can therefore also lose valuable employees it hoped to retain. Nothing improves a survivor's commitment to the mission quite like watching half the mission disappear on a Tuesday morning. Institutional knowledge is the asset that corporate accounting barely recognizes. It lives in people who know which customer will tolerate a delay, which supplier always misses a deadline, which line of code should never be touched, and which quality control warning looks harmless until it costs $1 billion. Companies assume this information can be transferred into a handover document. The handover document usually contains everything except the reason the system catches fire. Whenever Gary changes cell B17 Ferd offers a useful example, as long as it is described accurately. Over the last 3 years, Ford said it hired 350 veteran engineers, known informally as graybeards, to address quality problems, mentor younger staff, and reprogram AI tools. Many were former employees and others came from suppliers. This was not a story in which Ford fired the same 350 people, replaced them with a machine, and then begged all 350 to return. It was a story about a company rediscovering that pattern recognition software works better when experienced humans can explain which patterns matter. The AI was not useless. It was missing context that experienced engineers could supply. Rebuilding that knowledge can be expensive. Recruiters charge fees. Projects slow down while new teams learn the terrain. Former employees may demand a premium to return to an employer that already demonstrated how temporary the relationship could be. Customers may absorb the learning curve through delays or defects. Even when a layoff lowers payroll, the full economic cost may be spread across so many departments and quarters that nobody ever assembles it into one honest number. The savings fit neatly in a presentation. The damage arrives as a collection of unrelated surprises. This is where the financial plumbing becomes important. Big tech is not choosing only between workers and machines. It is dividing cash among operating expenses, AI capital expenditure, stock buybacks, acquisitions, debt service, and employee compensation. Data centers require enormous upfront investment. Cutting payroll does not literally purchase a server rack, but it can create room inside a broader capital allocation plan. The company can tell investors that operating expenses are under control, even while capital expenditure rises sharply. One side of the statement looks disciplined while the other side builds the future. Stock-based compensation adds another layer. Technology companies often pay employees partly with restricted stock units that vest over several years. This aligns workers with the share price and encourages them to stay, but it also creates compensation expense and potential dilution. If an employee leaves before an award vests, some unvested units may be forfeited depending on the agreement and severance terms that can reduce future compensation obligations. It does not mean every canceled award turns into cash, and it does not mean every vested share is immediately dumped onto the market. Meta's 2025 filings show how large and messy this system can become. The company recorded about $20.4 billion in stock-based compensation and spent roughly $26.3 billion repurchasing shares. It also had tens of billions of dollars in unrecognized compensation cost tied to restricted stock that would be recognized over future years. Buybacks, tax withholding, treasury shares, new issuance, and employee sales all interact. The clean internet version says companies print shares for employees and buy them back to erase the dilution. The real version has more footnotes, which is how accountants hide adventure. The safe conclusion is not that layoffs are a secret plan to confiscate employee stock. The safe conclusion is that compensation structure affects workforce decisions. Replacing a veteran employee with a new hire can reset salary location, vesting schedule, and bargaining power. Frequent churn gives management more opportunities to redesign the workforce around current priorities. It also moves more risk onto employees, who carry the cost of relocation, interrupted careers, lost benefits, and unvested awards. The company keeps the option to change its mind. The worker pays for the volatility. That option has value. A company can close a team today, wait for demand to become clearer, and reopen a similar function later under a different name. It can shift work to contractors, acquire a smaller company for its talent, or hire in a cheaper market. From the outside, this can look like confusion. From the inside, it may be a deliberate preference for flexibility over continuity. The organization is not trying to promise a career. It is buying labor one strategy cycle at a time. Artificial intelligence makes this easier to justify because the phrase AI transformation can describe at least four very different things. The first is genuine automation, where software performs a task with less human labor. The second is augmentation, where the same employees use AI to produce more. The third is capital reallocation, where a company cuts one division to fund AI elsewhere. The fourth may be ordinary cost reduction presented in language that investors currently reward. Those categories are routinely collapsed into one headline, even though they have very different implications. Gartner has argued that fewer than 1% of publicly announced layoffs in the first half of 2025 could be clearly attributed to demonstrated improvements in AI productivity. That does not mean AI will never eliminate jobs. It means the public story has been moving faster than the measurable evidence. In many cases, companies are preparing for automation, hoping for automation, or using automation as an explanation, while the underlying work is redistributed to surviving employees, contractors, or overseas teams. Several employer surveys suggest that the transition is not proceeding as cleanly as the presentations imply. Robert Half surveyed more than 2,000 hiring managers, and 3 in 10 employers in the survey said they had eliminated positions after implementing AI and later added those roles back. OrgView surveyed 1163 senior leaders. Among the 39% who said their organizations had made AI-related redundancies, 55% said those decisions were wrong. These are commercial surveys, not a census of the economy, but they reveal a pattern worth watching. A task may look automatable from a boardroom long before it becomes reliably automated in production. The important word is reliably. A demonstration might be right 95% of the time, while a particular business process may require 99.9% accuracy, plus an accountable person for the remaining failures. Customers, regulators, and production lines have an old-fashioned preference for systems that work on days ending in Y. When the cost of an error is high, human judgment does not disappear. It becomes the layer companies rediscover after the pilot program meets reality. Sometimes the role comes back with a different title. Sometimes it moves offshore at lower pay. Sometimes a contractor performs the same work without the same benefits or job security. And sometimes the surviving employees simply inherit the workload. In each case, the company may report higher revenue per employee, but the statistic can conceal a transfer rather than a true productivity gain. If 2 employees are removed and their work is performed by a vendor, the company's headcount falls. The work did not vanish, it changed invoices. The deepest long-term risk appears at the entry level. Signalfire's 2026 talent report estimated that hiring of new graduates by major technology companies was about 65% lower than in 2019, while early-stage startups showed an even larger decline. AI is not the only cause. Slower growth, tighter funding, and the aftermath of pandemic overhiring all matter. But the result is the same for someone trying to enter the industry. The first rung of the ladder has narrowed sharply, while employers continue asking for people who have already climbed it. That creates a pipeline problem. Senior engineers, product managers, security specialists, and AI researchers do not emerge fully formed from a cloud computing region. They begin as junior employees who make small mistakes, learn from experienced colleagues, and gradually become the people companies later describe as irreplaceable. If businesses stop training beginners because AI can handle beginner-level tasks, they may discover several years later that there are fewer experienced people available to supervise the AI. The technology can compress the apprenticeship. It cannot eliminate the need for one. The new labor market is therefore becoming more polarized. At the top, a small group of highly specialized workers can negotiate extraordinary compensation because every major company wants the same talent. At the bottom, contractors, offshore teams, and automated tools compete for routine work. In the middle sit experienced generalists whose knowledge is valuable but difficult to display in a quarterly metric. They are expensive enough to attract scrutiny and essential enough to be missed only after they leave. Shareholders can benefit from this restructuring when it removes genuinely redundant work and redirects money toward more productive investments. Executives gain flexibility and greater control over the organization. AI specialists gain bargaining power, but the strategy also creates execution risk. A company can improve its operating margin while weakening the systems, relationships, and training pipelines that generate future revenue. Efficiency is real only if output and quality survive the cut. That is why investors should stop treating the number of announced layoffs as the final answer. The first useful metric is net headcount over 12 to 24 months. The second is the mix of job openings, senior AI and infrastructure roles compared with junior and generalist positions. The third is stock-based compensation per employee. because a stable headcount with a rising compensation bill tells a different story from genuine labor savings. The fourth is capital expenditure and buybacks relative to free cash flow. The fifth is revenue per employee, checked against product quality, outages, delivery times, customer retention, and regulatory failures. If revenue per employee rises because software genuinely makes the workforce more productive, that is excellent. If it rises because work has been pushed to contractors, projects have been delayed, or maintenance has been ignored, the improvement may be temporary. A beautifully efficient company that cannot ship reliable products is just a spreadsheet with a logo. The financial statements usually reveal the savings before customers reveal the cost. Workers should watch a different set of signals. A company announcing AI investment is not automatically eliminating human labor, but it may be changing which skills receive protection. Jobs closest to revenue, infrastructure, security, regulation, and responsibility for final outcomes may have clearer business cases for retention, although none is layoff-proof. The safest career may no longer be the role with the most impressive title. It may be the role where someone must answer the phone when the automated system confidently does something ridiculous. The broad conclusion is uncomfortable because it is less satisfying than either side of the AI debate. Big tech did not lay off nearly 1 million employees and then invite those same employees back. The roughly 950,000 figure often cited comes from a tracker of announced job cuts across the broader technology and startup sector, not big tech alone and not a verified count of unique people. Nor did the industry simply replace a giant workforce with software and then discover that artificial intelligence was useless. It cut one labor market and began assembling another. The new workforce is more specialized, more expensive at the top, thinner at the bottom, more flexible for management, and less secure for many mid-career generalists. Some of this is normal economic change. Technologies alter jobs, capital moves toward new industries, and companies reorganize around opportunity. But the speed and repetition of the current cycle have changed the employment bargain. The old promise was that workers would trade loyalty and long hours for compensation, learning, and a degree of stability. The new promise is more honest. Even if nobody has printed it on the office wall, the company will keep you while your role matches the strategy, and the strategy is updated every quarter. So the next time a technology company announces 10,000 cuts, do not ask only how many jobs disappeared. Watch which roles vanish, which roles open where they are located, how compensation changes, and where the cash goes. Follow the workforce for 2 years, not 2 news cycles. A company that cuts deeply and rebuilds later may have made a costly mistake. It may also have successfully reset wages, canceled projects, shifted risk, and regained leverage without ever intending to remain smaller. Big tech did not fire the future and then hire it back. It fired the old career ladder and began building a narrower, more expensive one in its place. Artificial intelligence may not have eliminated work, but AI investment and the restructuring around it are changing who gets paid to do it, who carries the uncertainty, and who never gets the first chance to learn. The headcount can return without restoring the careers of the people who were displaced. And that may be the most important part of the AI labor story that the layoff headlines never show.